Welcome to the Babies in Business Podcast. Join your hosts, Rachel and Avram Gonzales, real-life parents and business partners. Each week on Babies in Business, Rachel and Avram create a space for entrepreneurial parents to find their own way. They'll dive into insights on topics like leadership, efficiency, self-awareness, budgeting, and human psychology as they nurture their family and build their business. Here's your hosts, Avram and Rachel.
Hey y'all, we're back. It's Avram and Rachel.
Hello.
Today we're really excited to talk to you about strategic planning.
You really are.
We are. This is like super geek out episode, and I really hope that you're ready for just a different way of approaching strategy, and I hope you get the enthusiasm that we have for strategy. In our last episode, we shared how we're changing the strategy of our podcast. Hope you go back to that and review that. I think it'll be powerful here.
Yeah, because it really does set the stage for what we're talking about in the next couple of episodes. So you really do want that foundation.
Today is
knowledge.
exactly. Today's about turning your goals into a strategic plan. So you've got the goals and things set in place. Now, how do you figure out what are the most important big picture items that you need to tackle to actually reach your goals? And that's where strategic planning comes in. That's where knowing how to ask really good, powerful questions like the ones that we're going to share with you today come in handy to set you off in the right direction.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this later on, but we had a couple of things come up that inspired us to make these changes, but we're going to talk about some of the ways that we measured the things that actually have informed these changes, and then just really excited to get into the plan and how we're being strategic about this. So we're excited.
And in future episodes, we're going to make this a multi-part deal. We're going to watch these goals turn into a strategic plan today. Then we're going to take the plan and turn it into actionable steps. Maybe that's the next one or the last one. And then we're going to get really nitty gritty and show you Rachel's love, which is diving into the details of getting it all scheduled into a project management format, like just making sure that the steps needed to reach your goals actually happen. So strap yourselves in for a multi-episode journey around strategic planning and implementation.
Yeah, and I think that's the key right there is implementation. So we can talk about strategy, we can talk about plan, we can talk about goals, all we want. But if we don't actually take it to the finish line of having something to do, so we want to get here, but how do we get there? So if we want to go to Walmart, there are steps in between. It's like you need to, with us, load the baby up, get everything ready, load the baby up, get in the car, drive there. You got to Walmart. Okay, you did it. Those are the steps. But if you just said we're going to go to Walmart and you decided you were going to leave in 2 minutes, you'd be sorely disappointed in this household.
You would. And if you promised the kids that you were going to go to Disneyland this summer, but you didn't put in place the things that needed to happen to get there,
right?
You're going to have some sad babies.
Yeah. So, we want to keep our promises, but also not deflate ourselves because we're not able to get the things done. So love this series that we're going to be talking about because it's really going to take us through that entire process.
And we're going to use the podcast, the Babies in Business podcast, as an example throughout these episodes to show you real life how to apply the things that we're sharing with you in every episode. So let's jump into the topic for today. There's a couple different areas we're going to touch on as we turn our goals into a strategic plan. So if you haven't yet, go back, listen to episode 27. It's where it all started. And then today we're going to first look at, let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. We do have a formula. We're going to follow today, a little bit of a format. There are 4 different areas that we're going to talk about today that come together to help you create the plan. First, we're going to examine the gap between where you are now and your goals. Second, we're going to take an inventory of your most valuable resources. Third, we're going to identify the key activities that will become part of your plan. And then you're going to wrap up with the actual plan we're going to give you again, what we're actually doing with our podcast to change its trajectory. So let's just start at the top. First thing we wanted to jump into is examining the gap.
Yeah. And I think in order to examine the gap, first off, you need to know where you are in order to measure that distance, like a tape measure, We want to put up a fence. We want to know how long that is. That's what we're doing right here. So we have some real hard evidence, numbers from our podcast. We're really excited to share that with you.
And because we have numbers, this really helps us get real
Yeah.
with where we're actually at versus just going off of a feeling. So I think whenever you can involve measurement here, that makes things very tangible and you can't fight the evidence.
Well, and I think that this brings me back to the last month we've had with Lincoln. He's such a happy baby. He wakes up happy. He'll babble in his bed, all these different things. But since time change, it's been a little bit crazy here. So he's not really loved the adjustment of the time. But it's really cool that we have this app that tracks his sleep. And that's so important because as parents, we can get caught up in it every day. And how awful it is at times during the day when he's fussy and he's just not wanting anything and all the things. And we can think he's been doing this for, and then,
Wow.
and exactly, and then put on a number or a day and we exaggerate how bad things are. So when we can have evidence, like for our baby sleeping, we have an app, we track his sleep, we track naps, we track bedtime, and that really helps us to actually be grounded in reality.
Put things into perspective.
Yes.
Oh, this won't be going on for like 4 days, but it feels like 4 months.
Exactly. So we can relate to each other and we can come together with that.
So starting with the goal, then we're going to share the numbers for you from the podcast. The goal we shared in the last episode when it started, it was, this is a fun project for us to do. We want to share and talk about it. That's not changed.
Right.
But since we've published a bunch of episodes and we've gotten some feedback in the form of measurement and numbers, we're thinking, wouldn't it be great to double our listenership? Wouldn't it be great to reach X number of downloads per episode?
And what can we do to impact that? So
Yes.
that's the question that we've been asking ourselves. We see the numbers. Now, what thing can we change? Maybe it's a little tiny tweak. What can we do to impact this on the rise?
Absolutely. So here's some of the numbers that we've cherry picked about the podcast. The goal, as I mentioned, we would be interested in doubling our listenership.
Yeah.
Okay. So keep that in mind as we share with you these numbers. Number one, total downloads for the podcast so far. Very excited about this. 1,491. So we're just grateful that people are listening and downloading. Let me just put it that way, right? We think we're pretty funny, but obviously some of you do too. You keep listening. How do you know? So almost 1,500 downloads since we started. Total number of episodes, 27. Average downloads per episode, 55.
It's pretty good.
That's pretty good.
And I think that's surprising to me, actually, as I'm looking at these numbers.
I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
Like, wow, people are downloading, like there's 55-ish people downloading this episode, each week on average.
Sure.
That's cool. Okay. So that's the numbers coming in directly on the podcast that reflect on listenership. We also are interested in measuring the effectiveness of the website. It's this other part. Okay. And the website's got a lot of metrics that help us understand who is coming to the podcast from places like social media.
Yeah, because we put a lot of effort into
We put
social media.
a lot of effort into social media. And there's a big discussion of that in our last episode about how and why we're changing that tack. We spent a lot of effort on social media. Here's what happened. Okay. 251 site visits. So that's significantly down from the total number of podcast downloads.
Right.
Those are, by the way, individual people. Does not reflect number of
Multiples.
people coming back and visiting
Okay.
multiple pages and stuff.
Cool.
Okay. That's just the number of people that visited unique.
Okay.
Of that 251, 64% of them came from what Google calls direct. So what is direct? What is that source? Direct is when somebody has the actual URL of the website, or Google can't track where it came from. Like maybe it was an Apple phone and they've got pretty strict on their terms of service and what data they'll share. That's like a big dump of everything. So 64% unattributed. Rachel and I, we do a lot of networking. There's a bunch of people in our close proximity that just love the podcast. So they've gone directly to the website.
Yeah.
the next two stats are awesome for purpose of this podcast. 29% of those people came from social media.
Right. But not from all the work that we've been doing on social media.
Yes. So 200 something posts that we put together and put up on social media. Admittedly, not done a lot of the community building that we would like to do. We're going to talk about this more in a minute.
Right.
We've spent so much time and energy between us and our team putting together posts for social that I think are pretty badass.
They are.
That only brought in like 90 visitors to the website.
Yeah.
To 30%. But check this out. It wasn't, and we did the looking before this episode. The days that the most traffic came to the website were when I posted a story to my personal Facebook or Instagram profile that was very compelling, and people went to the site as a result of it.
Yeah. Which is pretty awesome. I think that tells us a lot. So we're looking through these numbers to see, okay, what are we understanding from these numbers? What is this telling us? What story is this telling us about our numbers, where people are coming from, what's working, what's not working, really?
Yeah.
What is working? Well, when you talk about the episode drop.
Yeah. Because it's not coming from the actual babies in business profiles.
Yeah, the information that sits there.
Right.
Or the posts that we put.
Right. Even us, we do a really good job of resharing all the posts.
Right.
And
But
that
there's
just
nothing.
But there's no activity. Doesn't seem to be driving activity, and the data, I think, confirms this.
And I think that that's something, as we're looking at this, I think that that's something where we could focus that instead of doing all the different posts that we do for babies in business, that we maybe have just the episode drop, and then we go and we say something personally to our network, and then that can help to boost the visibility.
That's the one thing that has been effective. It's
And we've
our
seen
personal
it.
network, right? So we can cut out a bunch of fluff,
Right.
and drive
time.
And drive most of those same results moving forward.
Right.
This plays in further into the wrap up of this episode, which is what the strategy is actually going to evolve to.
Right.
Last stat I wanted to share with you here: number of visitors from Google search.
Building a business while raising a family can be tough to juggle for any entrepreneur. Knowing where to focus and how to spend your limited time is critical to your success. That's why Babies in Business has produced and made available a fantastic audio resource for you. It's titled 5 Key Focus Areas to Build a Profitable Business Without Burnout. During this short training, Rachel and Avram peel back the curtain on their secrets to building a business that serves your family, your dreams, and beyond. To download your free copy of the 5 Key Focus Areas, go to babiesandbiz.com/download. Again, that's babiesandbiz.com/download to get your free copy. We hope you enjoy. Now, back to the podcast.
About 4%. Very small.
Yeah.
Now, as we'll get into when we talk about the inventory or resource inventory, one of our strengths is our agency, Digital Harvest, and the search engine optimization work that we do in our day-to-day serving our clients. So how much energy did we put towards SEO on our podcast?
Zero.
Zero.
The biggest thing was we have a website. That means it's possible, but we haven't done anything with it.
Right, which the website didn't launch until like 7 months into the podcast.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's also that piece. I think just kind of a funny number and silly that we didn't, like, none of our process was focused on that part.
Well, you have to remember, though, when we were doing this, you were very much not a huge part of it. The point was, how can we do this for as little time on your part as possible?
This is true.
And we did sacrifice the search engine optimization side because that is your strength. It is not our team strength at this point. We've chosen to keep that on you.
Right.
For our business.
Well, we had a team member that was doing all of the copy, that was picking out all of the clips.
Yep.
She's not with us anymore.
Yep.
So she was a big part of that strategy and one of the resources that we had that we used to execute.
Right. And so now not having that person, it also changes the makeup of the shared responsibilities.
It does.
You've taken on quite a bit of stuff.
Yeah. Do you think it makes sense to move to the next part? Which
Absolutely.
So let's
I'm really
talk
excited about this.
Now that we've reviewed the numbers, the gap is apparent. in doubling. We kind of have an idea of where we're sitting right now, what
Yeah.
contributed to those things,
And we can measure it.
and we
It's
can measure
measurable. We
it.
have these tools in place already.
Right. Now we need to take an inventory of the resources that we have available right now that we could put towards our goal of doubling listenership, doubling the number of downloads per episode.
Right. Well, and I think that, as we're looking through these resources, I think it's really, really important to note one of these resources is something we bring up every single time that we talk about anything, whether we're adding something, subtracting something, whatever it is, we talk about this all the time, and that is time. Time for you and me is really limited with a 1.5-year-old and being pregnant halfway through almost.
Yeah.
We've got small amounts of time and we need to use them wisely. We also want to accomplish this goal and not increase our time spent on it. So the resources, we have very little time.
Time. There's two more we've got that we got here because these are in our control.
Yeah,
Time is in
correct.
our control.
Yep. And the biggest one that we talk about. And then we have the financial side. We are not going to spend money on this.
Yeah.
We want to spend as little as we can, and it's not a regular spend.
Right. So between software, paying team members still,
Right.
some of the time that we put into it, giving that an amount because eventually somebody will come in and start taking over some of these tasks.
Right. So being aware of what that is.
We can produce and put out this podcast for about $400 to $600 a month is what it comes out to.
Yeah.
Paying
correct.
for the website, paying for all this stuff.
With doing what we do, the frequency of 2 times a month.
Yep.
Otherwise, it doubles.
Yep.
One time a month.
Yep. So we're
we're aware
really
of that.
clear on that and what it has cost us in the past. We haven't evaluated that as much now today, but we have an idea of what it is.
Right.
And we don't want to do more than that. This is not a moneymaker for us. It's a passion
No.
project. It could become something bigger later.
Right. But right now, what we're doing is we're in the phase of, do we still love it?
Yep.
Does it still work for us? Does it feed our soul? And we just like to play with growing it. That's really what that helps us. We love that. And then the next thing, resources is skills. Who is good at what on our team? Are people in the right place? That's sometimes a question when we're looking to increase things. Are we using people in an optimized way? Really, their strengths. So I think we really do have to look at that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the human capital element.
Yeah.
And who is good at what?
Yeah. And I think we've really come down to it. We've really come down to a really great process for the podcast. It was a little clunky there for a minute. And then we were able to really ask the question, does it have to be this complicated?
That's true.
And then we reeled it back a little bit. And then we even pulled it back a little bit more to make it less and less complicated and less time consuming. I think last week you took it in half.
Yeah, so the
Your
amount
time?
of time that I was spending previously was about 2.5 hours
And sometimes 3.
on the
Right.
post-production of a podcast. So that would mean that
Right.
after we've recorded, I am spending time picking out clips, doing the captions for those clips, and delegating those items to another team member
Yeah.
to get out there.
Right.
Right. So that's the amount, and reviewing the podcast so that the transcript so that I could do that.
Right. Correct.
2.5 hours. So this last podcast, we're applying the new method and the new strategy. I brought it down to an hour and a half or hour 20, something like
Yeah.
that. Almost
Yeah.
almost cut it in half.
Exactly. And that's very impressive. So what we're looking to do is we want to, within this whole goal of doubling our listenership, we also want to double how many podcasts we put out. Instead of doing 2 a month, we want to do 4 a month.
Well, we know that
So
we can impact
we
the
know
total
that-
number of downloads like that for sure.
Yes. And we know also that as you bring your time down, then really bringing in more podcasts in the month, it kind of keeps it the same as what you have been currently doing.
Right. Doesn't change
And
the
then-
time.
Yeah.
I
And
put
then
in.
and then we're going to talk about some other things, the other things that we do to help us get efficiencies that make that possible. Because when we have found in our house, if we're constantly behind the ball, it is coming to crush us every single week with the podcast coming out. That's not a good place to be.
There's a lot
So
of
we need to be
anxiety
ahead.
around that.
Yeah, and we need to be ahead, but also it doesn't give us that choice. We've talked about this in podcast episodes before. When you're in a hurry, you're not in choice. You have no choice. It's do it or don't do it, but It needs to be done. Do it or do it now kind of thing.
Is that a plug for one of our episodes, Never in a Hurry?
I think so. Never in a hurry.
That was episode 25, December 19th of 2020. Yeah, before we move on to identifying the key activities, I do want to point out the skills piece, and I want to point out where our skills actually are and where the holes were, I think, in our old strategy.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, one of the skills required our main strategy so far has been to try to grow the podcast through social media.
Yes, correct.
And we have felt like that just hasn't happened.
Right.
Okay. Nobody on our team has a high skill set for social media,
That's correct. Yeah.
right?
Well, here we are trying to cut our time consumption on social media personally. We don't want to be on social media a lot. And we have this toddler, and what is phone? It's Lincoln right now.
Yeah,
Phone's name is Lincoln.
Yeah,
he wants to watch
he wants
videos.
to see videos of pictures of himself. So he calls it Lincoln. It's so funny, right? So we have one of the most important parts of it we don't have.
Yep.
Over and over when I asked for advice on how we could grow it with our social and have people take a look at what we've done and give us feedback on like different Facebook groups and stuff, everybody comes back to the same thing, which is like, well, how much time are you spending growing the community for your podcast? And I'm like, look, I'm already spending 2.5+ hours every single week producing this thing. I don't want to go out and spend that same time again to do it on a passion project. I don't want to do that. So it's like, this isn't working. The one skill we've been sitting on the whole time is our ability to strategize and execute on a search engine optimization campaign.
Sure.
The thing that we do every day at our company.
Yeah.
Didn't even acknowledge that skill.
Right. Well, and we took it and we were, if we take the same time that we are using on our podcast currently, and we choose to actually go through with this and not do all of these posts, then we do have some time within that same amount of time that's been allotted before
to do it,
to do search engine optimization. And it's not actually, if you think of time as money, it's not spending more money.
It's not.
It keeps it even.
It's a replacement.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's a great way if you think about it, kind of multiply time.
Yeah.
But we just changed it around.
Yeah.
We just shifted it.
We've kind of already started touching on this. The third part of the 4 things that we're sharing with you today, identifying key activities. We've already shared that we figured out where the majority of the traction comes from on social media, which we found in the data.
Yeah, correct.
It's from our personal posts.
Yeah.
Right? We want to look at the ways that we can bridge the gap. So if we're not going to increase our social media time and we're not going to build community in that area, because that's kind of what's required to make that channel sing.
A lot of time.
Then what are the other ways? So we've talked about this. We can further promote and go deep on our networks right now.
Right.
That's slow. It's limited. What are the other ways that we could bridge the gap? Well, we looked at SEO, search engine optimization.
Exactly.
Totally unutilized. Like, what are the other channels available to us? I don't know if we had any other ideas when we started digging.
We didn't really, because it's more like the power of the question. When you ask the question, then you're able to see some of the answers. Otherwise, we just have these blinders on. It's kind of like clutter around the house. The block sits there for long enough and you walk around it long enough, you just stop seeing it. So you stop seeing these things. So when you ask the question, then things can become visible.
Another really common strategy that people use to increase the downloads and listenership for their podcasts is having guests on and going out and being guests.
Right.
But again, this is where we run into issues with time.
Right.
When we bring a guest on for the podcast, it's usually recorded, or we've had like 4 guests.
Right.
It's all been video.
Right.
Having it on video dramatically increases the amount of work that we have to do on my plate and on our team's plate to produce it.
We had one that was so long because the video didn't come through very well and the audio. You had so much work to do on that.
The person that we were interviewing doesn't complete thoughts all the way and comes back around. And so when it came to trying to create short clips, the amount of editing that it took to create a streamlined narrative that made sense in under a minute, took took so long. Instead of that 2.5 hours, I think I spent over 4 that week finishing that one.
It was such a slog for that one.
So it's like, well, we have the ability to choose our schedule, you and me.
Right.
We can always get together to record episodes.
Right.
Hey, yo, right? That is not a roadblock for us.
Correct.
So time is coming up a lot as the limiting factor
Yeah,
for things that we
don't
could do
want to spend more time.
to bridge the gap.
Correct. So we're just saying we have this finite amount of time. Time is our capital right now, and we need to use the best. We need to use it to the best of our ability.
Yeah, we essentially started brainstorming a bunch of ways that we could bridge the gap.
Right.
And what we've just shared with you are all the ways that our inventory, what we have available, the resources, cannot execute on some of these things. And
Right.
you're going to find that at your household and in your business, whatever you're looking at, there are constraints that you have to work through and around.
Well, and we have to be really honest about them. So there was a while where we were consistently not meeting our goals and in our business. And it was getting really, really frustrating. And it was because we were ignoring whose time we were adding to, that we were requiring so that we could accomplish these things. If we bring on something new in our business, oftentimes it takes your time, Avram. And that's not okay. We need to very much understand what you have to give during the week. So that is the one thing that I would recommend right here is be very, very clear, brutally honest with yourself. What resources do you have to give to this thing that you are trying to give time to and become efficient in and get more results? Maybe it's something around the house. Maybe it's your business, whatever that is, or client acquisition, or, whatever those processes are. But I also think it's really important to not just scrap the whole thing. It's so important because you have gained ground somewhere. And to scrap everything, how long have we spent on the podcast so far?
Oh, 27 episodes, all these hours between us.
It's so much time, like just the months, probably 8 months.
Yeah,
or more.
well, I think in terms of like actual full 40-hour work weeks, if you told them all up,
Yeah.
probably 2 months worth.
Yeah, so we've spent an immense amount of time on this. We have learned a lot. We've perfected our process. We've reduced our time
Hey,
so much.
the production time and system to getting our podcast out to all the different platforms, including YouTube and some of the nuances of that, we've dialed that all in. Like
Right.
all of that post-production, pretty easy.
Right. And we don't need to rewrite that. So a lot of things are working for us. So I just need to remember to not just get rid of it all because we're getting discouraged. Like, do this kind of deep dive and you can diagnose your own problem. Really, you can. So think about growing up. We would play this game Clue, and you probably know Clue. You probably played it. You probably love it or hate it. Probably one of the two. And
Rachel is so good at Clue, by the way. It's unbelievable how quick she can solve it. I'm like, wait, I haven't deduced a single thing yet.
I love that game so much. But my strategy was, so for those of you that maybe don't know about Clue, there are 3 cards. So there's a room, there's a person, and there's a weapon. You're figuring out who committed this crime, in what
Who
room,
done
with
it.
what. Yeah, with what tool. And you're trying to figure out those 3 cards that do not exist, but you have multiple players. So you're having to go around and kind of like go fish through the rooms of the people and figure out who has what. So my strategy was always have at least one card that is my control card in every time that I ask. So I'm going to say maybe the dining room by Mrs. White and the wrench. I better have one of those things because that gives me some grounding to understand what other people have. So it's kind of like that with this strategy, you have to keep the things that are working so that you can actually really see what's not working.
So what I didn't know about this strategy, and I never employed this strategy, Rachel has whooped me several times, I never guessed with the control that was in my hand. So I wasn't able to gain the ground that she did, and then she would finish the game way before me or any of the other players had figured out some of those things because she was using this strategy, building on what she already knew. And I guess the concept that we're trying to relay here is you've got something of value that already got you to where you are now.
Yep.
Build on that.
Yep. And don't discount, like, it kind of like with entrepreneurs, we don't get praised by our bosses. We are our bosses. We don't get any kind of recognition, really. So it's our job to do the congratulating of ourselves when things are working out. When we do something good, congratulate ourselves. We've got to see the things that are working for us.
Yeah. And we had this here in the notes. I think we've talked about it a lot, maybe not much more to share. We always follow, when we look at our key activities here, the 80-20 rule.
Yep.
The Pareto's principle for effectiveness. So an example of, and what that rule is that 20% of what you do creates 80% of the outcome. So
And that was evidenced.
yeah, we had an episode several months ago, worst client ever. That's a great episode. If you deal with people in your business, that's everybody, right? We all deal with people.
Yeah.
20% of your customers are going to make 80% of the noise.
Yep.
And complaints. It's this small group,
Yes.
right? Also, small group of your customers, clients, will represent 80% of your income, the referrals that come in, the revenue that's received. All right. So we apply that, and we talked about this multiple times now. What was the 1 or 2 activities that drove the biggest results for us
Right.
on social media? We examined that. We're like, okay, do we pull this out completely?
Right.
Or what do we leave that was working?
Exactly.
Us posting on our personal profiles and sharing it.
Yeah. I mean,
That was it.
And it could be the announcement post that people can get the information from social media.
Yep.
You know, maybe it's a combination of what we've been doing, super
Right.
simple,
That small amount
and
instead
then
of,
us doing the heavy lifting on a different part.
yeah, instead of spending the time to produce like 5 or 6 micro pieces of content in addition to it that basically go nowhere,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
We didn't want to put ourselves on video for this purpose. Makes it even harder for us to record a podcast.
Right.
Maybe someday.
Right.
So it's just kind of like out. So looking at what are the small things that we can do that would make the most difference, I just think that's a very important part of identifying the key components of your strategy.
Yeah. And another way that we say it here is done is better than perfect. So I think that that resonates with me because I do tend to be a perfectionism or perfect, like have those perfectionism tendencies. And just getting something up and starting to measure, because if it were left up to our perfectionism, we would never have launched this podcast.
That's true.
Because there are so many things that we would like to do differently or better, or that we think would make a difference, but we fantasize about that. You know, we had a call with somebody in our business like this last week, and he wanted us to drop everything, go to his office and talk to him about marketing. But what he really wanted was not that. Well, was it, Avram?
Not at all. Can you just build me a website? It's like, no, dude, that is not what we actually do.
But not only did he want a website built, what kind of website did he want built?
Very high-end, aesthetically pleasing. Like, he had a lot of requirements for what he wanted to see in a website.
Okay, so now comes the funny part. Currently, his presence on the web is atrocious. His website looks awful, but he thinks that it has to be this really aesthetically pleasing, high-end, whatever. If he doesn't spend $100,000 on it, probably he's not going to do it, kind of thing. And that's kind of where we would like our podcast to be. We'd like to spend a lot of time and a lot of money and blah, 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 you know, all these things. But in the end, it's not really about that. That's not going to get us where we want to go. That doesn't get us the goal that we want. We want more people to listen. And we want to be real, really, you know? We want to come in authentically.
Yeah.
So coming up with the formulation of the plan is such a fun part. We want to talk about this. And, you know, what are those things that we need to do in the podcast to come up with that plan? What is involved in that plan?
We've pulled together all of the things that we need.
Yeah.
Right? We identified the gap, why the gap is there, ways to bridge it. We've looked at the resources and things that we have. Now we bring those things together, and you've already been hearing in real time. We're nixing certain ideas and boiling things down. What we are going to do in order to accomplish our goal is we're going to double down on our strength, search engine optimization. What that means is, and we'll share more details in future podcasts, as part of a series, a bunch of small but significant activities that we're going to execute with the website and the content that's being produced.
And we are going to stick within the time budget we have set for ourselves.
That's right. Second thing that we're going to do is we're going to cut a lot of the social media activity down significantly to free up time for the change up with search engine first.
And our supposition on that is that we're not going to lose traction because we currently haven't gained any through it.
Correct. And we're seeing all the activity happening from our personal sharing anyway.
Right.
So the rest of this is not going to suffer. That's
Yeah,
our supposition.
As long as it's visible on social media and we have something to tag, I think that we're going to be great.
Absolutely. And so we'll grow the podcast listenership and then maybe push people back later to social to interact with us. But, we're still building a community there.
Yeah.
Right. The last thing is we are working towards producing and publishing an episode each week.
And we have a strategy to do that within the time, not taking up the time.
Exactly.
It does take us back to that point where we were before you cut the time in half, but we're capable of doing that.
Right. And that's going to bring us into our next episode.
Yeah.
Right. One of the big things.
Oh, sorry. There's one thing that I wanted to say, as you're looking at this plan, as you're trying to formulate all this stuff, just make sure that when you're trying to come up with this plan, that you're actually asking, does it work? Can this actually work? And is it reasonable? Because if you're not asking those things, you are a little bit off-centered with something that you're assessing.
And if you're starting something completely from scratch and moving in a new direction, you might be thinking, oh, I am going to publish a podcast every single week, but you've not published a single one. Like you're starting a podcast.
Yeah.
Reel it in, dude. You might want to start with one a month or one every other week so that you figure out the process and things first before you ratchet those kind of goals up.
Right.
Because starting from nothing and then into something, that's a big ask of yourself and your team if you're involved, of your family if it's a household decision.
Right.
To go from 0 to 100,
right.
You're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're excited to talk about the next thing. Next line items on the podcast for next week, or actually 2 weeks from now.
And that's turning your strategic plan into action steps. That may not be the exact title we come up with, but it's the next piece here. We've got our plan. We know the 3 things that we're doing, right? It's only 3 things.
Yep.
There's not a ton of stuff to this.
But it's not a ton of change either. It's doing more of what we've kind of touched on already.
And less of the things that don't work.
Exactly. That's it.
That's all that we're doing. And so we're going to break that down further because what is a dream without
a plan?
A plan?
Yeah.
Nothing. So this stuff has to start being broken down. And I can't wait to share that with you in the next episode because we're going to share a ton of different tools and mindset pieces with you that are going to help you conceptualize this in a different way. I think become more organized in how you put together your strategic plans and how you plan for the future. This is something that we're really proud of and excited to share with you because I think it will make the world of a difference in the trajectory for your house, your home. I know it's the same thing, but your business.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Well, and I'm really excited to be recording these episodes because this is where a lot of our strengths come together. You have the strategic side. I have the very much nitty gritty. Let's make a list about it. So we're combining these things together. So it is nice when you have people that you're working with that have the strengths opposite of yours.
Complimentary, baby.
Yep.
We thank you so much for listening to the Babies in Business podcast this week. If you got something special out of it, or you can see one of your friends in this episode, please share it with them. That's how the podcast grows. Also, with your recommendations on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you listen, drop us some feedback. Give us that 5-star with a written recommendation on there. People look at those and help them determine if they're going to spend the 15, 20, 30 minutes to listen to their first episode and see if they like it. Without your recommendation, they may never check it out. So we really appreciate those. You can find us everywhere on social media at Babies and Biz Pod. You can also email us hello@babiesandbiz.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you've got ideas for future podcasts, we'd love to hear those too. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.
Bye for now.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Babies in Business podcast. Who do you know that would benefit from hearing this episode? Share it with them and post about it on social media. You can find the show notes for this episode, free downloads, and connect with the rest of the community at babiesandbiz.com. We'll see you next time.